Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through Chapter 5 of our book, vSpar 6 Foundation Exam Guide. And so really what this will be is we'll be discussing the vSpar distributive switch capabilities. Now I'm not going to go through all the differences between a standard switch and a distributive switch. You can go through this yourself, but you can see it has quite a bit more features in it, so it's a lot more powerful. Probably one of the most compelling is this idea right here of data center level control, which gives you the ability to manage the switch through the data center for multiple virtual machines. And so that is a huge advantage. You also have the ability to do per port policy. This is just another example I'm using. And this allows you to create policies based on a single port rather than just doing on a group port basis. Now, group port, you still want to do that. It gives you standardization, but sometimes you might want to treat a particular VM differently. And because of that, you might want to have that port be a little bit different than all the others. So it gives you that individuality that you don't get with just group port policies. Just choose another one at random. Link layer discovery protocol. This is a lot like what you find on switches and routers that are able to detect what their immediate neighbor is. Such information as another. What is it? What's next to me? So you'll see this if you're familiar with like Cisco or other networking devices. They do the same thing. You tell you if you're a router or a switch or something like that. You also have the ability to have um, load balance teaming, which is to say I'm going to monitor what is going on in my different uplinks, and I'm going to adjust to keep the optimum data flow. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of some of these features, and you can go through here if you have any questions. By all means, just ask, message me or something like that, and I will be more than happy to go through that and give you a little bit more detail. What this chapter is really going to be about is us discussing an idea and then going into the NetLab environment and trying it out and see how well it works. And so the first thing we're going to really talk about is creating and deleting a vSpar distributed switch. Okay, and so the first thing you have to know is you have to have the right licensing for it. Luckily in our environment we do, which is kind of nice. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to move this over to the side, and I'm going to bring up NetLab. Now I have already, now I'm going to move it right back over, but I've already entered the lab, so here's our environment. I have gone ahead and run this vCenter client, or the vCenter client's over here, the V client over here, and we're ready to start connecting to vCenter. So I'm going to open up a browser window, and unfortunately I opened up more than I anticipated, and I'm going to go and set restore. And you've been through this before. We're just going to have to proceed through all the different checks. It's saying it doesn't recognize their security certificate. It's not a problem. Username is admin, and we're going to type in our password. We'll log in. And so throughout this course, I hope you get very familiar with this and feel very comfortable with the different areas. We're constantly going to be going back to home, even sometimes when we don't need to be, just to get you more familiar with it. I'm going to go to home. From here, I'm going to go to networking. So we're going to create a distributive switch, and so that's why we're going into the networking. I'm going to right click on training, and then I'm going to come down to new virtual, where did I find it? Distributive switch, there we go. And we're going to create a new distributive switch. I'm going to keep fairly within the textbook so it matches. So I'm going to call this a DBS1 for virtual distributive switch 1. And go ahead next. And here you're going to decide, well, what kind it is. And so here are our legacy ones, and here's the current version that we're on, which is 6.0. we're going to just go ahead and allow that. Over here, we're going to determine, well, what are some of the settings? So just 1 second. So for example, we might need more than 4 ports, so maybe we'd move that up to 8 or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and allow it to enable its input-output control. We're going to create a default port group, and the port group, we're just going to leave it on the default name. Go ahead and hit next. At this point, we're going to hit finish. Okay, so now that we've created it, let's go ahead and take a look at it. And as you can see, it's just over here. Here's our distributive switch. If we click on it, you'll see that go to the management. We can start managing this. See, here are different uplinks that we've created. Now these uplinks connect to the physical ports. So that's one way to think about it. And so actually, let me go ahead and bring this window in here. This is a useful picture that I've been using. In fact, I don't want that one. Let's find the other one. Just give me a moment. Here we go. This is on the VMware Docs website, which is a very useful website. And so over here, it gives a real good discussion about uplinks and data flow and that kind of thing. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to come in here and discuss really the distributive switch and different aspects of a distributive switch. One of the things I wanted to talk about is here are your uplink ports, okay, and here are your physical ports. And so on the private side or on the virtual side, you have your uplinks that connect to your physical. Now sometimes you can have one uplink connected to multiple physical links, okay, but just be aware of that. So usually the terminology will be VM for VMware, and then you have NIC1, NIC2, NIC3. Those are going to represent your uplink, your physical ports on your physical switch. Okay. Your host is, we have 2 different hosts over here, and then you have vCenter, and then you have your distributed switch, which actually expands into this area too. And we'll talk about that when we get to the management pane and the data pane in our discussion. So we'll go back to that picture in just a little bit. In fact, we'll probably use this picture. I like this one a little better. So let's just move on. So now that we have a switch, what we want to do is we want to add a host to it. Okay, and so this next section is we're going to talk about adding a host to this distributive switch. And so the first thing we're going to do, in order to do that, we're going to right-click the distributive switch, and we're going to select Add Host and Manage Hosts. Okay? And so if we had hosts here, we could manage them, but at this point we don't have any hosts connected to it. And so we're going to just say leave it on the radio button for Add Hosts. At this point, there are no hosts added, so we're going to hit New Host. We only have one host to add, which is our ESXi, which is basically our hypervisor. This is where all our hosts will be connected to, or the hypervisor they'll use, I should say. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Okay, from here we're going to hit. Second, I'm just moving my equipment over. It's driving me nuts. Excuse me. From here we're going to go ahead and hit Next. I'm going to leave these 2 checkboxes on, so manage physical adapters and manage VM kernel adapters. We are not going to worry about these 2 because we're not migrating any kind of virtual machines, and we're not managing any advanced settings at this point either. So I'm going to hit Next again. Okay, just 1 second. I want to look at something real quick. Okay, so this is showing my my links, and currently they're linked to 2 different virtual standard switches, and then you have one that is unassigned. I'm going to go ahead and move the unassigned to this new switch that we're creating. So I'm going to assign it to the first uplink, and so I'm going to cancel real quick. These are supposed to be my physical links, and so as I highlighted one of these and I say assign, these are the 8 uplinks that I can assign it to. Right? And so as you can see, these are the ones that we had created when we first selected the host and how many selected the distributive switch and said how many uplinks we wanted. I can also assign one of these that is currently being used by the standard switch if I wanted to. You need to be careful doing this. You could negatively impact your switch, your environment. When you hit next, it's going to analyze it. And it's going to tell us whether or not there's a problem or not with that. We're just going to go ahead and hit next. But again, it's telling me be careful, there might be a problem. And so look for this symbol down here. I'm going to go hit next. You can see there's a symbol right there. It's saying there might be a possible problem. And so you need to pay attention to that. Since this is our network and this isn't in production, I'm not that concerned about it. Now it's going to analyze it. Notice there was no impact. Okay, so we're fine there. Then we're going to hit next. At this point, the number of managed hosts is 1. The number of network adapters updated is 2 physical adapters. So that's what we expected to see. So we have 2 of them on the distributive switch, and we have 1 physical adapter still connected to one of the standard switches. I'm going to go ahead and hit finish. Okay, and so the next thing we're going to look at is removing a host from a distributive switch. And so we can stay in here and just continue on, but let's say you went out to lunch or something like that, or I want to be sure we understand how to get back here. Okay, so we go back to home, and we go to networking, or we can come over here to go to networking. It doesn't really matter how we do that. We're going to right-click over here, and we're going to select Add and Manage Hosts. Okay. If I want to remove it, I'll go ahead and hit Remove Hosts. I'm going to look for my attached hosts, and I'm going to go ahead and hit that checkbox saying this is the one I want to remove. I just confirm that by saying OK, hit Next, and then Finish. And now we have successfully removed that host. You can see how our topology table changed. All right. And so just rewind it. You can see how that will change. We no longer have those 8 uplinks showing up. So that's how to remove that. Remove that host, I should say. So I want to stop here just for a moment and discuss a little bit more in detail this idea over here. So one of the big differences between a standard switch and a distributive switch is that a distributive switch has the data pane, or you can consider its management, or the management pane, I should say, in vShere. And then you have this data pane over here. And so let's come back over here, and you have this idea of hosts here. Okay? And so your hosts are also called proxies, host proxy switches. And so that part of the switch, you can think of a switch as broken up into 2 pieces. Those 2 pieces are the data pane and the management pane. Now, the data pane is implemented. Basically, would be data packet switching, filtering, tagging, those types of things. The things that the switch does, moving packets from one place to the next. The management pane would be controlling the structure, the configuration of the device. So your management pane's over here in vCenter. Your data pane is going to be this on your actual VMware, on your VMware host. So host 1 has its own data pane, host 2 has its own data pane. We call that the host proxy switch when we're using a distributive switch. Now, I know this doesn't really fit perfectly with the lab we were just doing, but I want to make sure we go through this idea because I want it to be clear in your mind. One of the big differences between the distributive switch and the standard switch. The standard switch doesn't separate the 2. Okay, so you don't have one place in vCenter where you can configure all of these host proxy switches. Here I have the ability, because I have the distributive switch, to make changes. And because all of these switches share one management pane, they will reflect those configuration changes. But the data panes still can be different. Okay, because this proxy is going to have different packets being sent to it, and so that's how it's broken down. Again, with a distributive switch, you can do that, but with a standard switch, you don't have the management pane that is controlled in vCenter. Now, one thing I want to point out is a port group. Okay, so a distributed port group provides network connectivity to virtual machines and accommodate VM kernel traffic. So basically, from virtual machine to virtual machine or your VMware kernel traffic. Okay, that's a port group. Your uplink is a little bit different. Okay, so uh, this is, I think, the important line right here. An uplink is a template that you can use to configure physical connections of hosts as well as failover and load balancing policies, things like that. You map physical NICs of hosts to uplinks on a distributive switch. So one way of looking at it is your uplink is your way out. Okay, it's a template you're using to configure these here to work the way you want it to. Okay, and so my uplink ports here are my VMware representation or my connection to the physical uplinks or physical NICs. So what we're going to do next is we're going to uh, create those. Okay, so that's the next thing we're going to do. So let's do the port port groups first, and then we'll do the uplinks. Okay, so let's go ahead and minimize this, or just move this over the side. And we're going to stay over here networking, but again, we were simply over here at home, and you go to networking. Okay, that's where we're at. Come over here to our distributive switch. I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to say, 1 second, I wasn't paying attention. Excuse me, I've got a cough, so I keep on having to stop and start. I'm going to say new distributive port group. Now I'm going to stay fairly consistent with the book, so I'm just going to add their text to what they labeled theirs. So it's going to be test dev. Come on. Okay, I have a little bit of a lag time on the keyboard. That's annoying. Okay, we're going to go ahead and hit next. We're going to leave the defaults, and we're going to hit next again. And we're going to hit finish. Now that we've created these, you can see that it's appeared over here. Now that we've created these, we're going to configure them. The way we're going to do that is we're going to select over here on the left-hand pane. We're going to select the port group that we've created. We're going to right-click that, and we're going to say Edit Settings. Now, as you can see, this is the window we had before. So we have the ability to change a lot of different things, such as security. Okay, do I want to reject promiscuous mode, or hey, MAC address changing, things like that. Hey, traffic shaping. This is, or even VLANs. Do I want to establish a private LAN, which would be a VLAN that only exists in my VMware environment, it's not seen from the outside, and actually I could make it so it's not seen by anyone outside of my, anyone even in my network if I wanted to. VLAN trunking. There's a lot of different things you can do on here. I could set monitoring. Let's come over here and look at monitoring. Monitoring. Could enable, disable that. Traffic filtering. Could enable it, and this would give me the ability to make different changes. Now, let's not forget the power of all of this. This is the idea that every device that's connected to this port group here is going to inherit those policies. So this would be my template that I use for all the VMware hosts that are connected to this distributive switch using that port group. It would inherit those characteristics, and then we can go in there and make changes to individual hosts, but this gives us a lot more flexibility. It allows me to do things more efficiently. It's consistent across the hosts, and that just is really, really it helps out my management. If we so choose, we can easily delete the port group. I'm just going to come over here and right click the port group, and I'm going to say delete. It's kind of sad though, we get all this work and then we delete it, and I'm going to say delete that port group. And so that way, if you make a mistake or as time changes, you decide your needs are different, you want to get rid of the port group you've created, well now you can do that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about adding and removing uplink adapters to your distributive link uplinks. The way I want you to think of these uplink and distributive virtual uplinks are it's your way out of your virtual world into the physical world. And so your uplinks adapters, um, let's see one second, I'm just looking at something. So your uplinks are going to connect to your distributive virtual uplinks, and that's basically the way it's going to connect to the real world. It's fairly simple to create these. You're going to go to home. I'm just going to go all the way to home to this page. There's no difference from here and just going into here. I just want to make it as consistent as possible, but you guys can see other stuff. Now for the first time, we're going to go to host and clusters. We haven't done that today. So we're going to go to host and clusters. Okay, so one thing to make sure this lab is going to work properly is we have to go back to networking. Now normally we've come over here and come down to networking. You'll notice up here we have a nice quick access. And so I'm just going to go to networking here. Now I've already done this step. I stopped the video and I did it, and then I realized maybe I should show you. And so we have to go back and reconnect the host. So come over here to manage and add hosts. I put manage, but it was add. So I came in here, we went ahead and added that host in there. We also assigned this host these NIC cards. So I'm going to assign that to this uplink. I'm going to assign this one to that uplink as well. Just assign all three. See what happens. Hit next. And if you were in the real environment, you would care. We don't care because this is a practice environment. It's our environment. You screw it up, I can always rebuild it. So that's not a problem. So we went ahead and did that. Then we're going to go back to hosts and clusters. Come over here if you wanted to. It's faster. We're going to click on the host, and we're going to make sure we're in the Management Networking tab. Here it's giving me a warning saying that there are no physical adapters connected to this host because we haven't connected them yet. We can, but we haven't connected them yet. That's why there's warning here. And this is where you're going to read that warning. I'm going to leave it on virtual host, although we could go to physical adapters too, either way it works. But I'm going to go back to virtual hosts, switches I mean. I hit add, I'm going to hit add host networking. It's going to be for physical adapters, so I'm going to hit next. I'm going to browse. We'll see that we have these three different switches. We're going to choose our virtual distributive switch. Then we're going to hit next. From here we're going to assign it. So I'm going to click on my uplink and then I'm going to hit the plus symbol. I see that I have one available. Hit OK. It gives me just other pieces of information here that is beyond the scope of our discussion, but just so you can kind of peruse through here, it's properties, CDP, Cisco Discovery Protocol, and LDP, Link Layer Discovery Protocol. This would be for Cisco devices, discovering what the device is next to them, or its neighbor, and this would be for non-Cisco devices. And here's all that information. Hit OK, and then hit Finish. And here is where you will see it. You'll see that we no longer have that error anymore. You'll see that we have one uplink over here assigned to our NIC adapter over here. So you see a physical or basically a topology here, which is really nice. If we wanted to, we could remove it simply by clicking on it and saying remove. I'm going to leave it there for now, but the activities have you remove them. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about creating and configuring removable adapters. Um, However, I think this would be a good place to pause and just let us take a moment. So we're going to go ahead and end this video, and we'll start another one in just a little bit for the second half of Chapter 5.